Buhle, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. And you would have heard that discussion by our reporter Yazid Kamaldin with some of the residents there in Kayamandi and the ward councillor. You know, the thing that strikes me is every time this happens, we deliver new fire kits to these sites, and some months down the line, years down the line, maybe, residents are expected to rebuild again and again.
No, thank you very much for inviting us, and greetings to viewers at home. I think one of the important things that we must emphasize is that this is a crisis that we're dealing with. Year in, year out, we're dealing with fire disasters, we're dealing with flooding disasters, and this requires somewhat of proactive planning from the state. Now, there is a piece of legislation that is called Disaster Management Act that compels, or rather mandates, the municipalities and government to proactively plan for the disasters. And what we see in Kayamandi, what we saw in Kwalanga, is that there is a lack of proactive planning from the state. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion year in, year out. The state knows that these very same areas are hotspots, but there's lack of proactive planning in terms of the disasters. And the second thing that is important is that the state has discontinued, at least the municipality, the city of Cape Town, has discontinued the provision of emergency kits, these fire kits that people are speaking about, and they did this in 2020. And part of the claim is that it's because of fiscal difficulties or challenges that national government had cut down on their budget. Therefore, they're incapacitated in terms of providing emergency kits to people. And that's insufficient. That's insufficient and lacks foresight and proactive planning from the municipality. Now, one of the important things that are important here, we can't be kept on a cycle of reactiveness when these things happen. And this crisis doesn't require humanitarian aid. It cannot be that every year that we're taking soup to people. And we must appreciate on the same breath the hard work that the Gift of the Givers is doing in the communities in terms of assisting our communities. The Gift of the Givers has replaced the responsibility of the state. I mean, the state is caught year in, year out, unable to assist residents, but Gift of the Givers has filled that void and is assisting our people on the ground. Now, I'm saying that the problem goes beyond these reactive measures that the state has. And part of the solution is that the state must invest in incremental planning for informal settlements. The state must release and provide parts of land for the communities. We know that our communities are overpopulated, they're overly dense, and therefore these issues of fire disasters that we see, they would happen year in, year out if they are not properly addressed in the context of the state releasing land. And the state, the municipality just released a budget not so long ago saying that 75% of their budget is going to infrastructure development. And we need to start seeing the impact of this budget allocation on people's lives. We cannot be speaking about figures that do not translate to changing the material conditions of our people.
Yeah,
and part of what you are saying is that prime land in the city center must be released to mitigate the challenges of that people find themselves in. Lastly, is the issue of policy. There's lack of policy clarity in terms of how to deal with these issues. Recently, the Human Settlements Department released a white paper on human settlements. And part of what they're saying is that they're moving away from provision of stop structures for people, meaning that they will no longer be building housing for people as promised in 1994. What they'll be doing is provision of site and services, and they'll be prioritizing the elderly and the disabled in terms of top structures. Now, the argument is that the state, if they're no longer providing top structures to people and doing sites and services, they must clarify what that means. In the context of, they are saying that we provide you with a piece of land, you must see how you build for yourself. And we're saying that is insufficient. That is not an adequate provision of housing to our people. We're saying that the state must explore state subsidized for self-building. Otherwise, the crisis that we find ourselves in will be exactly this one. People will build structures that are adequate to their income, and that will increase informality and will continue to have fire disasters if the state is not having clear policy guidelines in terms of these issues that we're facing today.
Yeah, the state, though, will respond to that, Booi, and it's on the road to elections now, so we're going to be hearing a lot about these numbers. But that between the period of 1994 and 2022, the state housed about 5 million people in need. That's the latest data that we have from the Department of Human Settlements. And yet it still feels like the housing lists around the country just keep growing.
Yes. I mean, currently in the country we have 3.7 million housing backlog. 3.7 million people are without access to adequate housing. And that number is estimated to grow at 178,000 annually. So if that doesn't paint a picture of a crisis, I don't know what is. And again, we know that the state is incapacitated in terms of meeting the demand of housing that is there. And that's why they're taking this position of being enablers and rendering the other provision of housing to the private sector. But there are complexities in terms of that particular arrangements, in terms of who gets access to housing, because the majority of low-income earners cannot afford rental stock. How do you mitigate that particular question? And we're saying that the state has parcels of public land. It is parcels of public land that can be used for provision of housing of our people. And what we're saying is that we see public land being used for commodity as a mere commodity rather than for its social value. For instance, say in the city of Cape Town, where the crisis of housing of 600,000 people in the Western Cape are in the waiting list, are in the backlog of housing provision. And we're saying that the state must release land. And for instance, parking lots are another issue, that we have parking lots that remain vacant for most of the day. And we're saying that the state must take these parking lots and densify them and use the other portion of the land to build housing for people. And that's a call that the state is not listening to. And we have golf courses that are being underutilized in the city of Cape Town, parcels of land that could help us in terms of mitigating the housing crisis, but the state is not coming to the party in terms of providing these solutions. And we're heading towards elections now, and the state's seriousness will be measured in terms of their attitude towards land release. And part of that would require that the state guarantees tenure security to communities. For instance, here, the communities in the Western Cape across the country made submissions to the state president to say that use State Land Disposal Act to release parcels of land to communities. Because what we see is that there's a criminalization of people that have used alternatives to provide themselves with shelter. For instance, we know that there's a growth of occupations in the country. There's a growth of building occupations, land occupations, what is called land invasions. We're saying the state must not lack foresight in terms of continuously criminalizing people that have provided themselves with housing in the absence of the state, because the state is incapable of doing so. The state should see these occupations as lived alternatives and provide emergency services and provide basic services to these communities, so that the communities are able even to mitigate this crisis that we have of fire disasters. Because people are using fuels and so on, and that's why they're in these dangers that they're in, because the state lacks foresight in terms of releasing these occupations to these communities and granting tenure security to these communities and refurbishing the homes and these occupations, so that they're lived alternative for people rather than criminalizing poor people.
You know, I want to talk a bit more, Buhle, about the housing list. That's obviously a story that we track throughout the year, but it's a big focus, especially during an election year, just because of the major promises going into democracy from the ANC insofar as housing is concerned, right? That was one of the big issues on the ANC's list of priorities into democracy. And the problem with the housing list, as long as it is and as devastating as those numbers are, is that it's only actually a fraction of the people who are in need. The housing list, if we were to take a look at the people in need, should be a lot longer than it is.
Definitely. Definitely. And again, maybe this question around the waiting list and the housing list, it's a complex question. It's a complex question because no one knows how this housing list looks like, and it's safe to arrive at significant list because how it's rolled out and its implementation, people are under the assumption that if you're long on the list, you would get housing. But in reality, that's not how it's working. So there's this functionality within the state in terms of even a consolidation of this housing list. So we're not sure if we know the numbers that are there, that are reported through census, that they are this way, but there isn't necessarily a very stringent transparency in terms of how this housing waiting list looks like. And I think that's something that as residents we need to probe more and require and call for transparency in terms of the housing waiting list and its mechanisms and how it works.
Buhle, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. The head of political organizing and campaigning at Ndifuna, Ukwazi, joining us there from Cape Town. Of course, the question we keep asking whenever there are disasters which leave so many people, thousands upon thousands of people homeless, is why do we keep rebuilding the same unsafe structures